Tonight, we drift back to a world where philosophers argued in sunlit courtyards, soldiers trained to flute music, and marble temples gleamed against deep blue skies. But beneath that serene surface, there's tension, lots of it. Because while you settle into your pillow and fluff your blanket just right, the Greeks are yelling. Again. And not just any yelling, it's full-scale panic, with dramatic togas flapping in the wind, and city-states accusing each other of betrayal while turning their tired eyes westward toward a rising superpower that doesn't speak their language, but sure seems to love getting involved: Rome. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes in a room carved of stone with oil lamps flickering gently on carved columns. Outside there's shouting in the agora. Athenian elders are meeting to decide whether to send another delegation to Rome. It's not the first. It definitely won't be the last, because the year is 200 BCE, and Philip V of Macedon is acting like a man who forgot he's not Alexander the Great. He's stomping around Greece, flexing his influence like a weightlifter in a robe, forming shady alliances with other powers like Antiochus III, and generally terrifying smaller city-states that just want to worship their gods in peace. Athens, proud but aging, finds itself stuck between a rock and a militarized Macedonian phalanx. They want help. They need help. And what better candidate than the Romans, who just finished defeating Carthage in the Second Punic War, and now have way too much time on their hands. Of course, Rome doesn't leap to every cry for help. That's not very Roman. Instead, they hold debates, long, exhausting debates. The Senate ponders, should we intervene? Is this a good use of taxpayer denarii? After all, Greece is culturally fascinating, but politically exhausting. Still, Philip's behavior is starting to look like a problem that might grow legs and walk west, especially with Antiochus III making eyes at the Aegean. And so the Senate votes yes. You sail across the Ionian Sea on a Roman bireme, the air thick with salt and tension. A Roman consul named Sulpicius Galba stands on the deck practicing his Greek phrases in case diplomacy is needed. He probably hopes it isn't. The legions on board are veterans. Some of them still have scars from Hannibal's elephants, and they've heard the Greeks fight with passion, but also a lot of chaotic flair. As Rome's fleet docks near Apollonia, it's greeted not by cheering crowds, but by a diplomatic tangle of local ambassadors offering gifts, threats, confusing treaties, and maps that all disagree. Welcome to the Balkans. You'll be here a while. The quirky twist. One of the Greek cities isn't even on the mainland. Yet somehow they've declared themselves experts on the whole Macedon situation. Historians still argue whether Rhodes truly wanted to preserve peace or just protect their trade interests. Either way, they brought ships and opinions. And here comes another Pergamon, a kingdom in Asia Minor with more ambition than land. Their king Attalus II joins the anti-Philip chorus like an over-eager baritone. Rome begins to realize this won't be a clean intervention. It's going to be a messy group project, and the Greeks have already lost the assignment sheet. Philip, for his part, is unimpressed. He calls the Romans meddlesome and insists they don't understand Greek matters. He might have a point, but his alliance with Antiochus and his raids on neutral cities are losing him sympathy fast. Macedon had once been a land of philosopher kings and imperial dreams. Now it's a kingdom of calculated thuggery in a chariot. You walk with Roman envoys as they attend meetings, each more absurd than the last. In one, the Thessalians argue for their independence while simultaneously asking for Roman garrisons. In another, envoys from Aetolia declare they never liked Philip despite a recent treaty, and absolutely believe in pan-Hellenic values, especially when there's gold on the table. Philip, in response, sharpens his spear and tells his men to get ready. Somewhere in the mess, a Spartan ambassador mutters that this is why they hate democracy. Back in Rome, the Senate sends a quiet message to itself. This is going to get loud. And just like that, you're no longer watching distant diplomacy. You're standing on Greek soil, the iron smell of soldiers' gear in the air, watching legions form into those beautiful, terrifying Roman checkerboard patterns. They don't wear capes or sandals like the movies. They wear sweat discipline and an expression that says, "We'd rather be farming, but here we are." You exhale into the dry wind that blows from Macedon. War is coming. And everyone's pretending it's about Greece, but deep down it's really about who gets to write the next chapter. You're not even 3 steps into the Greek countryside before your sandals crunch on something ominous, trampled olive branches. They were likely meant for peace offerings, but in Greece, those seem to rot before they're ever accepted. The Roman legions are advancing cautiously, trying not to look like an invading force, though their armor glints just a little too proudly in the sun. At the front of this slow, deliberate march is a man named Titus Quinctius Flamininus. You try saying that 3 times fast while chewing dried figs. He's young for a consul, barely 30, and unlike many of his colleagues, he actually speaks Greek fluently. That alone wins him some local points. But his face tells another story. It's the look of a man trying to balance Roman military objectives with Hellenic vanity while praying that no one insults his pronunciation of hoplite. Flamininus didn't set out to become a hero of the Hellenic world. He was a patrician with decent connections, more brains than brawn, and a stubborn belief that Rome could bring order to this writhing pit of alliances, grudges, and oracles. When the Senate handed him command of the Roman response to Philip Thybe, they were basically saying, "Good luck. Try not to start a regional war. Spoiler, that ship has already sailed." You follow him now as he meets with Thessalian dignitaries in a smoky hall thick with incense and unspoken resentment. The locals want freedom from Macedon, of course they do, but they also don't want Roman taxes, Roman soldiers camping in their vineyards, or Roman cultural criticism. "Your symposiums are charming," one tribune says, dryly, if inefficient. Still, Flamininus listens. He nods. He translates Roman demands into flowery Greek. He reminds city-states that they once stood against tyrants, and they can do it again. There's applause. Somewhere in the back, someone coughs sarcastically. Back in his tent, the consul consults maps. Lots of maps. None of them agree on what territory belongs to whom. One even shows Sparta with a smiley face drawn over it, which you suspect is satire. Macedon's power lies north in the hills and mountains, where Philip V commands a solid army of phalangites, men trained from youth to fight in unbreakable blocks, wielding pikes so long they might as well be tree branches. It's not subtle warfare, but it works. Roman legions, by contrast, are all about flexibility. Each unit called a maniple can pivot, adapt, retreat, charge. Think less slow bulldozer and more angry centipede. Historians still argue whether Rome's manipulation of the terrain and maniple formations truly represented a revolutionary military doctrine or just a very lucky matchup, but it's about to be tested. Flamininus hears that Philip is raiding towns again, burning fields, destroying statues, that kind of cheery behavior. The consul knows delay means letting the Macedonian king rebuild morale and maybe lure Antiochus into a joint venture. So he pushes forward. The Roman army moves along steep mountain roads. You feel every twist in your calves. The wagons groan, the soldiers groan more. One legionary mutters something about how the Carthaginian sun was nicer than this rocky mess. At night, the men warm themselves with wine tales of Hannibal, and wondering aloud why the Greeks seem to think every ruined temple is historically significant. They reach a key town, Elatea, strategically placed and freshly liberated. The locals throw flower petals, children sing. A goat walks into the ceremony and eats the petals. It's all very wholesome until word arrives that Philip's scouts are nearby. You ride ahead with Roman cavalry through valleys where the fog clings low and every tree could hide a javelin. Macedon's army is camped not far off near a place called Cynocephaly. That name, it means dog's head, should tell you something about the topography. Uneven hills, rough visibility, and perfect for ambushes. Back in camp, Flamininus gathers his officers. They eat olives and argue tactics. One grizzled centurion suggests retreat. Another wants to flank Philip at dawn. A younger officer proposes diplomacy. He's politely ignored. Flamininus leans over the map again. You can almost hear the tension in his breath. He knows this next step matters not just for Rome, but for his own career. If he fails, he's another footnote. If he succeeds, he gets to rewrite the definition of Roman intervention. But before battle can erupt, there's still the diplomatic dance. Rome sends messengers to Philip. The tone is stern withdrawal from Greek cities, respect their autonomy, and consider this your last olive branch. Philip replies by detaining the messengers. Classy. Meanwhile, across the Aegean, Antiochus III watches with interest. If Philip wins, he'll likely join the party. If Philip loses, he might get to liberate Greece himself. Either way, the Seleucid king sharpens his knives and waits. As you bed down for the night near Flamininus's camp, the wind whistles through pine trees. Soldiers mutter Latin lullabies. Somewhere a Greek ally complains loudly that Roman rations taste like boiled rope. And in the distance, the soft, rhythmic clatter of Macedonian shields. You won't see Philip tonight, but you'll feel him in the drumbeats that echo faintly through the hills, in the uneasy silence before dawn, and in the knowledge that once again Greece has pulled Rome into its never-ending argument with itself. The morning air over the hills of Thessaly carries a strange stillness, broken only by birds startled from pine branches and the clinking of armor being strapped on tight. You shift in your cloak and glance to the east. Beyond the ridgeline, Philip V of Macedon is preparing his men. You haven't met him yet, but you've heard the stories. He's charismatic, prideful, a fan of dramatic speeches, and dangerously eager to carve his legacy into the bones of the Hellenistic world. But here's the problem with legacy: it doesn't write itself, especially when you're the guy trying to keep up with a certain Alexander the Great. Philip V has ruled Macedon for over 2 decades now, inheriting a kingdom still shimmering with memories of greatness. His early years gave hope, reforms, battlefield skill, even a few wins that made people whisper, maybe he's the next Alexander. But whispers fade, and now in the harsh light of his middle age, Philip's greatness is being questioned more than admired. You ride past his lines and see the famous Macedonian phalanx, a bristling forest of sarissas, those absurdly long pikes wielded by soldiers packed so tightly you could bounce a coin down the row. Up close it's terrifying, like a centipede made of metal and determination. From a distance, less so, especially on rough terrain. And today's terrain is, well, very rough. Cynocephaly, the dog's heads, is a chain of rocky hills that seem designed to make sure nobody's plans survive first contact. The fog lingers stubbornly in the gullies. The grass is slick with dew, and neither side has a perfect view of the other. Still, Philip is ready to make a show of it. He addresses his officers, waving a spear for emphasis, his voice rising like a stage actor's. He paints the Romans as arrogant meddlers, foreigners who don't understand Greek culture, and trespassers on Hellenic soil. He conveniently forgets that he's the one who razed neutral Greek towns last year, but such is war. Memory becomes optional. You trail the king later as he inspects his army. There's a strange energy about him today. Part fatalism, part bravado. A few officers exchange glances behind his back. They've seen this mood before, and it doesn't always lead to good decisions. Then comes the signal. Skirmishers collide near the crest of a hill. It's messy, disorganized. Neither side knows how big the opposing force is yet, and visibility is poor. Both commanders hesitate, then they both stop hesitating at the exact same time. That's when things get very interesting. You're suddenly caught in the middle of one of the ancient world's most fascinating battles, not because of its scale, but because of how completely everything goes off script. Flamininus sends a small force forward, not realizing they'll make contact with the left flank of Philip's phalanx. Philip, thinking he has the high ground, orders an attack. His right flank hasn't even arrived yet, but he doesn't care. He believes the Romans are disorganized and the time to strike is now. This is where the phalanx shines a steamroller on flat ground, almost impossible to stop when it's fully locked in formation. Philip's right charges downhill and the Romans begin to bend, not break, just bend. You ride with a Roman tribune trying to organize a countercharge. He's breathing hard, yelling Latin over the clash of steel, realizing the terrain is his only hope. Because here's the thing about pike formations: they don't do stairs, or slopes, or slippery rocks. Historians still argue whether Philip committed too early, whether he even saw the terrain properly, or whether he just wanted one big dramatic win before lunch. Either way, he's now committed and vulnerable. Flamininus seizes the moment. He dispatches light infantry to hit Philip's exposed flank and sends reserve units in a wide arc behind the Macedonian line. You run with them through gullies and tall grass boots, slick with mud, breath steaming in the cold. The maneuver is fast, brutal, and absolutely Roman. Suddenly the phalanx, so fearsome when faced head-on, is being attacked from the side and rear. Sarissas aren't good for turning around. In fact, they're terrible for it. The Macedonian line begins to crumple. Not collapse, not yet, but the structure is gone. Commanders shout trumpets, blast orders fly, most of them ignored. Back at the ridge, Philip sees the disaster forming and hesitates. Should he commit reinforcements? Should he retreat? The fog thickens again, like the battle is exhaling confusion. And then, without clear command, the Macedonian right begins to pull back. Whether they're retreating or routing isn't clear even to them. What's clear is that the Roman legions are now pressing every advantage, discipline, flexibility, and the kind of coordinated movement that only comes from marching in 1,000 straight lines across Italy for years. Philip retreats. Cynoscephaly is lost. Macedon has been beaten not just by Rome, but by its own overconfidence and a hillside shaped like a dog's skull. You walk among the aftermath as dusk falls. Roman soldiers share bread and war stories. One of them jokes that these hills bite like dogs. Another holds up a broken sarissa and says, "Too long for its own good." Among the prisoners is a young Macedonian officer with a philosopher's beard and a soldier's scars. He stares at the Roman campfires and murmurs, "So, this is what order looks like." You don't answer. You just wrap your cloak tighter and watch the smoke rise. Philip survives, but the myth of Macedon does not. The fires from Cynoscephaly still smoulder when the next act of this tangled Greek tragedy begins not with a roar, but with a chorus of bickering voices from city-states who should by now know better. You're standing in a marble courtyard in Corinth, where envoys from Aetolia, Rhodes, Athens, Sparta, and others have gathered like family members, fighting over an inheritance they didn't earn. The war with Philip is technically over. Macedon has been beaten, and Rome has promised not to stay. But the power vacuum, that's another matter entirely. If you thought one tyrant was bad, just wait until you hear 5 city-states argue about borders. You watch as Flamininus makes his entrance, not in armor now, but in a flowing Greek-style cloak, hoping to look more like a statesman than a conqueror. He's walking a tightrope, stretched between two worlds: Rome's hard-nosed realism and Greece's romantic obsession with independence. He speaks perfect Attic Greek and quotes Homer a bit too often. The Greeks pretend to be flattered, but behind the flattery is suspicion. After all, the Romans didn't leave yet, and they're not exactly packing. Rhodes steps forward first, smug and sun-kissed. They push for Philip's naval power to be limited, convenient, since Rhodes basically lives off its navy. Pergamon follows, demanding that territories once taken by Macedon now belong to them. Sparta, true to form, threatens everyone with military force while claiming to be neutral. Athens gives a long speech full of poetry and vague philosophical references which nobody has the energy to translate. Flamininus listens, then declares something that makes history shiver. He says Rome will leave Greece free, totally free, as in no occupying legions, as in local rule restored. It's a shocking statement, and he times it perfectly during the Isthmian Games with thousands of Greek spectators in attendance. You're there when he climbs the platform flanked by trumpeters and scribes, his voice echoing across the stadium. He announces to thunderous applause that all Greek cities formerly under Macedonian control are now eleutheroi free. The crowd goes wild. Some fall to their knees. Grown men weep. A few probably faint. A bronze statue will later be erected in his honor. Even today, some historians wonder if Flamininus meant it. Was it a heartfelt promise or a clever PR stunt? Historians still argue whether his freedom for Greece speech was a sincere act of goodwill or a calculated move to earn local trust and consolidate soft power. You sit beside an elderly Theban who murmurs, "This is how gods speak." But the gods are fickle, and so it turns out are the Greeks. Because with Macedon humbled and the Romans poised to withdraw, old grudges resurface faster than you can say Delian League. The Aetolians want to dominate central Greece. The Boeotians start arming themselves again. Sparta insists on independence, by which they mean we'll attack anyone who looks at us funny. Rome sends more letters, then more warnings, then a few detachments of troops, strictly for observation, of course. The legions never fully leave, they just get quieter. Meanwhile, Philip V is licking his wounds in Macedon. He's still king, surprisingly. Flamininus allowed him to keep his throne so long as he shrank his army, paid reparations and stayed out of Greek affairs. But Philip is brooding. He's seen the Roman fighting style. He's felt the sting of flexible legions outmaneuvering his proud phalanx. And he knows the empire he dreamed of is now just a memory carved into a hillside. But if you think he's done, think again. He begins reforming quietly, carefully. He rebuilds his economy, tightens his alliances, and raises his sons to be sharper, subtler rulers. One of them, Perseus, watches Roman politics with intense interest. You'll meet him again. Back in Greece, the freedom Flamininus promised starts to feel conditional. Roman ambassadors make frequent appearances. Roads are improved, yes, but also used to move Roman soldiers faster. Allies are reminded of their obligations. You sit at a symposium in Argos sipping wine while philosophers debate whether Roman power is hegemonic or merely necessary. One younger thinker calls Flamininus a liberator. His mentor replies, "A lion can remove a thorn from your paw, but it's still a lion." Meanwhile, Rome enjoys the view from afar. They've expanded their influence without officially taking territory. Their reputation in the Mediterranean is sky high. Their enemies in Carthage are vanquished, their name echoes in the halls of Alexandria, and even the Seleucid Empire is starting to watch its step. But Rome is also restless. Victory is like honey, to them sweet, addictive, and never quite enough. The fringe detail you overhear one night. A Roman merchant claims that Flamininus receives daily gifts from grateful Greeks. Wine garlands even love poems. Another says he once caught the general practicing his own statue pose. Whether true or not, it's very on brand. Still, for now, things are mostly quiet. Mostly. Because as you ride along the coast of Achaia watching fishermen mend their nets under a rose-tinted sunset, a strange thought creeps in. What happens when the protector becomes the warden? When help starts looking a lot like supervision? The Greeks may have wanted freedom, but they also wanted someone to hold the map. Rome gave them both, and soon that choice will haunt them. You hear it before you see it, a low, hollow rumble echoing between hills. Not thunder, but something slower, heavier. A sound that doesn't end in rain, but in the sharp clash of bronze and iron. You crest a ridge and look down into the Thessalian valley below. There, stretched across the uneven field like two angry brushstrokes, stand two armies, Rome on one side, Macedon on the other. Welcome to the Battle of Cynocephali. Back in Rome, Flamininus is hailed as a military genius. He's given a triumph, the Roman version of a victory parade complete with painted elephants, captured armor, and probably one awkward guy holding a sign that says, "Freedom for Greece," in terrible Greek. Children cheer, senators nod with approval, and statues of Titus Quinctius start popping up in places you wouldn't expect, like Delphi. But you, of course, are in Greece, and from here things look different. Let's be honest, the Greeks were never great at group projects. And with Macedon temporarily out of the picture, every city-state starts auditioning for the role of most important ally. Aetolia naturally says they were the real reason Rome won the battle. Rhodes claims it was their naval support that turned the tide. Athens recites a poem. Sparta doesn't say anything but marches threateningly in a circle. Flamininus, now less of a warrior and more of a UN envoy, tries to balance it all. He meets endlessly with local rulers, each insisting that their version of peace involves a little more territory and a little less of their neighbors. You sit in a sunlit chamber in Thebes, sipping tepid wine, as two elderly delegates argue about a shared border that hasn't mattered since Aristotle had knees. You start to wonder if this is peace at all or just war by slower methods. Meanwhile, the city of Corinth is trying something bold, setting itself up as a Roman-style federation of allies complete with a council and a shared currency. It sounds ideal, like a soft reboot of the old Hellenic League, but beneath the olive branch rhetoric it's clear Corinth is angling for influence. The Roman presence gives it leverage, and it's not shy about using it. You walk the marble streets at night hearing whispers in taverns, "Are we free?" Or just better managed Rome says they're leaving. So why haven't they? My cousin says the freedom Flamininus gave us came with a receipt. And it's not just words. Armed skirmishes are flaring again, small, localized, but telling. The Boeotians clash with the Aetolians. Corinth imposes trade restrictions on a neighbor. A minor prince from Thessaly claims descent from Achilles and decides to raise a private army. Rome watches, then Rome writes, then Rome sends advisors. Flamininus keeps insisting that Greece is free, and technically it is, but it's also under surveillance, like a houseplant left outside, unrooted, vulnerable, and one frost away from ruin. The quirky detail that makes you pause. In Epirus, a village has built a tiny theatre named after Flamininus. They hold annual mock debates in his honor where actors dress as Aetolians and shout contradictory demands, while someone in a Roman toga yells, "You're all free," and pretends to run away. Comedy, tragedy, bit of both. Back in Macedon, Philip is doing something unexpected. He's complying. Quietly, he shrinks his army, pays his reparations, avoids stirring the pot. But behind the palace walls in Pella, he's grooming his son Perseus to be smarter, subtler, and maybe just patient enough to reclaim what his father lost. Rome, meanwhile, is already thinking ahead. Their eyes are drifting east now to Asia Minor, to the Seleucid Empire, to a king who thinks he can be both great and Greek, depending on who's watching. Flamininus senses this shift. He begins pressing the Greeks for unity. He urges them to settle disputes diplomatically to resist pulling Rome back into another war, but he's starting to look tired, like a babysitter who said 5 more minutes and now it's midnight. Historians still argue whether Rome ever truly meant to leave Greece alone, or whether the post-Philip years were always just a prelude to permanent occupation. The ancient sources say one thing, the ruins say another. You sit now on a stone bench near the ruins of a temple, its columns cracked and leaning. Birds nest in the broken capitals. A boy walks past balancing a loaf of bread on his head, completely unaware that he's treading on history. The dust settles slowly here, even more slowly than Roman promises. One day soon a new threat will rise in the east, one that claims to liberate Greeks while sounding suspiciously like Philip. And when that day comes, the Romans will be ready, because now they know how to talk like liberators, even while sharpening their swords. You wake to the soft hush of sandals on polished stone Roman feet, moving purposefully but not rushing. Not yet. The sun streams through linen curtains dyed with saffron, and outside gulls cry over the harbour of Corinth. There's a tension in the breeze today. Not war exactly, but something approaching it. The kind of stiffness that makes even the breeze carry instructions. Because today, Flamininus is making history again, only this time there's no battlefield, just a podium, a crowd, and one sentence that Greeks will repeat for generations. You are free. You stand at the edge of the Olympic Games, not as a competitor, but as an observer. The event still draws athletes from across the Hellenic world, even with Macedon licking its wounds and Aetolia picking fights with anyone wearing the wrong regional sandals. Flamininus knows exactly what he's doing. The Romans have never participated in the Olympics, but they understand drama, and this is a stage. At the climax of the festival, with thousands in the stadium and priests watching from marble platforms, he takes the floor. His tunic is crisp, his voice carries, and he speaks in impeccable Greek. He declares that Rome has fought not to conquer, but to restore liberty. That the Greek cities are now autonomous, their laws their own, their festivals untouched, their gods uninsulted. The crowd pauses, processing, then erupts. You can feel the cheer in your ribs. People shout, cry, kiss, leap. Someone throws olive branches into the air like it's confetti. A local historian will later write that the applause was louder than thunder, longer than a storm. Whether that's true or just poetic exaggeration doesn't matter. The point is, for one shining moment, everyone believes it. But you've seen too much to be fully swept away. You remember the Roman camps that never really packed up, the letters suggesting that certain city-states revise their treaties, the vague threats hidden inside smiles. Still, Flamininus means it, or at least wants to mean it. He walks among the Greeks without bodyguards. He listens to their grievances. He hosts symposia where he quotes Plato and tries the local wine without flinching. Even his enemies admit he plays the part of a liberator remarkably well. You follow him now through the streets of Delphi, where he pays tribute at the oracle and thanks Apollo for Roman victory. Locals murmur that he's more Greek than the Macedonians ever were. A teenager dares to ask him whether Rome worships real gods or just builds statues of senators. Flamininus laughs, both he replies. Back in Rome, however, eyebrows are arching. Some senators feel he's gone too far, talking like a king building his brand. In the East, whispers about Greek corruption slither through the Curia. One politician mutters, "We sent a consul, not a Homeric hero." Still, the Senate lets it happen. Why? Because Greece, for now, is behaving. The cities are organizing games again. Trade is humming. Grain is flowing. No one has declared themselves king in the last 5 minutes. That counts for something. But beneath the marble, calm cracks are forming. The Aetolian League, those old frenemies, are unhappy. They fought against Philip and feel they didn't get enough land or credit. Rome didn't win that war alone, they grumble. And when Rome reminds them of treaties, they remind Rome of Thermopylae, which frankly is a little off topic. You sit in an Aetolian council chamber one afternoon as a loud man with bad sandals declares that Greece needs Greeks to lead it. Several people applaud. One person immediately applies for a Roman passport. Meanwhile, Philip V isn't sulking in some corner of Pella. He's active. He's sending embassies to former allies, rebuilding fortresses just slightly outside the restricted zones, holding training exercises that accidentally cross borders. Oops, Rome takes note. They send a delegation, not an army, not yet. Flamininus is gone by now, replaced by quieter men with sharper pens. But the balance has shifted. No longer is the question, will Rome stay, but why would Rome ever leave? And while all this simmers, a new player arrives. Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. Tall, confident, and inconveniently named the Great, he crosses into Greece, claiming he's here to protect Greek independence. Yes, again, you meet him in Euboea surrounded by advisors, elephants, and a very tired translator. Antiochus speaks the language of freedom too, but his accent smells of empire. And somewhere in his retinue, an aging Carthaginian with a nose for strategy. Hannibal. Yes, that Hannibal. He's in exile, of course, Rome made sure of that. But Antiochus welcomes him not just as a guest, but as a possible asset. Historians still argue whether Hannibal ever truly advised Antiochus on how to fight the Romans in Greece. Some say he begged the king to invade Italy instead. Others claim his presence was symbolic. Either way, Rome hears the name and their knuckles tighten. Because freedom is fragile, and in Greece it's always just one speech away from being interrupted by marching boots. You're standing at a harbour again, this time in Chalcis, watching the sea foam curl around ship hulls, while diplomats arrive with scrolls full of ultimatums that smell faintly of olive oil and panic. The Seleucid king Antiochus III is now in Greece. Not metaphorically, not we sent a letter, but physically standing on Greek soil, wearing a golden cloak and calling himself the champion of Hellenic liberty. You can practically hear the Romans rolling their eyes all the way from the Forum. You may remember the word freedom from earlier in our journey. The Greeks heard it from Philip V, then from Flamininus, now from Antiochus. At this point, it's less of a principle and more of a group discount. Antiochus arrives with fanfare, ships, elephants, yes again, and diplomatic flair. His advisors hand out tracts. His soldiers hand out coins stamped with his image. You walk through the streets of Thebes, where Seleucid propaganda is suddenly pasted on the walls next to aging Roman proclamations about liberty and taxes. The city smells of fresh ink and nervous skepticism, but Greece isn't leaping into Antiochus's arms, not yet. Many cities remain cautious, remembering how liberators tend to forget their promises. Rhodes eyes him warily. Pergamon readies its army. Even Athens, once misty-eyed over Flamininus' issues, a polite but firm statement that Antiochus's arrival is unexpected and currently under review. The Aetolians, though they love it, their alliance with Rome has soured into resentment. They feel snubbed, undercompensated, and frankly embarrassed that Rome didn't make them regional bosses after the Macedonian defeat. Now with Antiochus waving banners and promising to cut Rome down to size, the Aetolians throw open the gates, literally. And so the scene shifts once more. You follow a Roman delegation slightly older, slightly more paranoid, into a war they'd hoped to avoid. Not against Macedon this time, but against Antiochus and the very idea that someone else could play global policeman. Antiochus in his gold-embroidered tent laughs. They don't own Greece, he says to his generals, and neither do I merely defend it. Historians still argue whether Antiochus ever intended to conquer Greece fully or simply hoped to draw Rome into a peace treaty favorable to his empire. But whatever his intention, the result is the same. Rome mobilizes again. You're with the Roman general Manius Acilius Glabrio as he surveys the pass at Thermopylae. Yes, that Thermopylae, the narrow mountain corridor where Spartan King Leonidas once held off the Persians with 300 men and one very determined beard. The terrain is dramatic, the symbolism even more so. Antiochus has camped there, thinking that occupying sacred ground will strengthen his legitimacy. But this time history doesn't repeat itself, it flips. Rome isn't the invading force crushed by terrain. They're the attackers, now using superior maneuvering to outflank Antiochus's army. They scale the same goat path the Persians used 2 centuries earlier, and they surprise the Seleucid troops from the rear. The King of Kings barely escapes with his life. His elephants, unfortunately, do not. You wander the field afterward, stepping over broken shields and discarded bronze helmets. The air is smoky with wet pine and burnt canvas. Glabrio's soldiers collect loot. A few local shepherds mutter that even Leonidas would have raised an eyebrow at how fast Antiochus folded. Antiochus flees back across the Aegean. The Aetolians scramble to explain themselves. We were misled, they say. He said he had more elephants. Rome is predictably not amused. They punish the Aetolians lightly this time, but the leash is shortening. Everywhere you go, Roman garrisons are quietly staying a little longer, just in case. Roman roads are being paved straighter, wider, for trade. Roman coins are showing up in more markets, just temporary. The quirky tidbit in Delos, a small statue of Flamininus, is quietly removed from a public square, replaced by one of Glabrio. When asked, the town magistrate shrugs and says, "The wind knocked it over." Sure, the wind. You attend a Roman feast in Corinth. It's celebratory but tired. Everyone knows what this means. Rome is in. Not just as an ally, not just as a presence, but as an authority. The idea of free Greece is beginning to feel like a pleasant memory, like a summer spent in the countryside before the rent was due. And yet, many Greeks still prefer this arrangement. The streets are safer, the roads are better, piracy has dropped. Taxes, though resented, are predictable. Still a few voices murmur under their breath, "We invited them. We didn't elect them." And as you lay down that night beneath a fig tree, lulled by cicadas and the smell of roasted lamb wafting through the town, you begin to understand why Roman power is so effective. Because it doesn't always arrive with fire and blood. Sometimes it comes draped in a toga, speaking perfect Greek, offering protection from chaos and staying long after the threat is gone. By now you've learned how the rhythm works. Greece cries out, someone powerful answers, and then things get awkward. But this time, the volume drops. You're in Delphi again, sitting on the cool steps of the Temple of Apollo, watching ivy creep along the sunlit marble. The priests burn incense like nothing's wrong, but the locals, they whisper, because Rome didn't just defeat Antiochus, it humiliated him. And with the Seleucid king licking his wounds in Asia, a new dynamic begins. One that's quieter, more bureaucratic, and somehow more dangerous. Rome now appoints observers to monitor Greek affairs. These aren't soldiers, not officially. They're legati envoys with military training, political instructions, and a habit of showing up at every important council meeting, whether invited or not. You see them sipping wine at symposia, strolling through amphitheaters, listening more than they speak. But when they do speak, cities change policy. Pergamon becomes Rome's favorite pet project. Its young king Eumenes II knows exactly how to flatter the Senate. He sends gifts, he sends letters, he sends maps with Macedon drawn just slightly smaller than before. He also sends gossip about Philip Phee's unusual army drills and Aetolia's secret talks with discontented city-states. And Rome listens closely. You walk with a Roman legate through the winding streets of Argos. He nods at a statue, smiles at children, and casually remarks that maybe Sparta has forgotten her place. By the time you reach the city gate, local officials are already debating new trade policies that align with Roman preferences. But not everyone is happy. In Macedon, Philip Pheeb is reaching the end of his patience and his life. He's been biding his time since Cynocephaly, keeping his promise to Rome, mostly. But in secret, he's reorganizing. His son, Perseus, sharper and colder than his father, is being groomed for something bigger. They've seen Antiochus fall, they've watched Rome's friendships tighten into chains, and they know that the next time Rome crosses into Macedon, it won't be diplomacy, it will be destiny. The fringe detail. Philip becomes obsessed with coinage late in life. He mints a special series featuring Heracles strangling serpents, subtle maybe, but the message is there. Macedon may be quiet, but it isn't broken. You attend a funeral in Pella. Philip's body lies still, but his legacy rises with Perseus. A crown passes, a challenge awakens. Meanwhile, the Greeks squabble. Achaea and Aetolia accuse each other of conspiring with foreign powers. Sparta, as usual, marches to its own drumbeat, sometimes literally, with parades through towns they don't technically govern. Rhodes begins to worry that Rome's power over trade routes is becoming absolute. They send a warning to the Senate. Rome sends a polite reply and then reorganizes the grain tariffs in their favor anyway. Historians still argue whether Rome's expanding control was a carefully planned strategy or just a series of opportunistic adjustments. Either way, by 180 BCE, the Greeks are waking up to the reality that Rome doesn't leave. You hear it in the jokes. In Athens, a new play opens where the character of Freedom wears a Roman helmet and constantly asks for more paperwork. In Delphi, a tavern owner renames his drink menu the 7 Labors of Flamininus, each one more bitter than the last. But the resentment isn't just cultural, it's generational. A new wave of Greek leaders rises, people who never knew a Greece without Roman presence. Some idolize Rome, study Latin, wear togas to dinner. Others dream of rebellion, mutter about old alliances, and toast to real liberty in candlelit rooms. You walk with one of them, a young Corinthian magistrate who quotes Aristotle by day and drafts anti-Roman pamphlets by night. He hands you a scroll sealed with wax, shaped like an open eye. "It's not for now," he says, "but it will be soon." Back in Rome, Senate records grow thicker. Reports from Greece arrive daily. One senator sighs and says, "We gave them freedom. They used it to insult our roads." And then comes the twist. Perseus, son of Philip V, begins pushing boundaries. He strengthens Macedon's borders, reaches out to potential allies and funds resistance movements, not openly, but enough to make Rome squint. You see it in little things. Corinth starts minting coins with a profile that looks suspiciously not Roman. Delos hosts a festival in honor of Greek independence, and the Roman ambassador coughs loudly during the opening hymn. And then Rhodes makes its move. The island city, long wealthy and well-connected, tries to mediate growing tensions between Perseus and Rome. They send envoys arguing that war would hurt everyone. Noble, right, not in Rome's eyes. The Senate takes this as evidence that Rhodes is too cozy with Macedon, and just like that, Rome drops them. Strips their trade privileges, cancels their favored treaties. The message is clear: mediators will be treated like meddlers. You're in Rhodes when the news breaks. Merchants shout. A senator's statue is pulled down. A child throws a fish at a Roman ship. It misses, but the message lands. Freedom, it turns out, has very specific rules. You wake before dawn in a stone house near Amphipolis, lulled not by the clamour of battle, but by something quieter routine. A Roman cohort drills nearby, not fighting, just training, practicing discipline, presence and visibility, because that's what the legions do now in Greece. They exist, like marble columns or overgrown temples. They're part of the landscape. Rome doesn't shout anymore. It doesn't need to. It watches, advises, suggests, and when it's ignored, it reminds. You travel with a Roman legatus from city to city, part inspector, part diplomat, part disappointed father. In Delphi, he compliments the priest's ritual cleanliness, then casually questions why the city's taxes were late. In Thebes, he praises the new gymnasium, then reminds them not to host any foreign envoys without Roman permission. This is what policing looks like now: subtle, procedural, bureaucratic. You sit in on an Achaean League meeting in Corinth. The League, a federation of Greek city-states, is still technically independent. It elects its own leaders, holds votes, has debates. But in one corner of the chamber sits a Roman observer, silent but impossible to ignore. He says nothing. Yet when a senator proposes contacting Macedon for grain, the idea withers before the second syllable. But resistance brews beneath the surface. Perseus of Macedon. Philip V's son has been crowned king. He's young, calculating, and unlike his father, knows better than to challenge Rome outright, at least not yet. But he courts discontented nobles, funds military reforms, and slowly builds alliances. He marries a Seleucid princess. He welcomes foreign advisors. He trains soldiers to fight not like the old phalanx, but more like Rome. Historians still argue whether Perseus genuinely wanted war with Rome, or if he merely pushed too far too fast and found himself cornered. What's clear is that Rome was watching and waiting. You visit Pella, Macedon's capital, and walk through its bustling marketplace. For the first time in years, the air feels optimistic. There's coin in the streets again, new walls rising, the smell of ambition baked into the bread. Perseus makes public speeches that sound cooperative, respectful, but also nationalistic. He praises peace, but only a peace in which all Greeks choose their destiny. It doesn't go unnoticed. Rome sends warnings. Rhodes attempts another round of mediation. The Senate replies by revoking even more privileges from Greek city-states deemed unhelpful. Aetolia is now effectively a Roman administrative zone. Rhodes becomes a trade backwater overnight. Corinth, however, flourishes. Why? Because Corinth knows which side its marble is polished on. It hosts Roman games, Roman theatres, Roman-style debates. The Achaean League moves its treasury there voluntarily, of course. But even here, whispers grow louder. You attend a gathering where philosophers muse on whether Greek democracy still breathes or merely gasps politely. One young orator calls Rome a father who forgets his child has grown. The room claps, quietly. And then comes the final straw. Perseus allegedly attempts to assassinate Eumenes, the sect of Pergamon, Rome's favourite ally. The facts are murky. No dagger is found. Eumenes survives. but the story travels faster than truth. In Rome, the Senate seizes it, a perfect justification. They declare Perseus a threat not just to Macedonia or Greece, but to peace itself. War is authorized again. But this war will be different. Rome no longer enters Greece as an outsider. It marches in as an authority. You travel with Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus. He's not flashy, not poetic, not Flamininus, but he's methodical, brilliant, and absolutely done with Macedonian drama. His legions land, move swiftly, and begin dismantling Perseus's alliances with ruthless efficiency. At first, Perseus resists well. He uses terrain cleverly, fortifies towns, disrupts supply lines. But Rome has adapted. It no longer fights like it did at Cynoscephali. It's faster now, more mobile, less arrogant. The two armies meet near the town of Pydna in 168 BCE. You walk the rocky hillsides where it unfolds dusty, sun-blasted, and echoing with the creak of armor. Perseus fields a powerful phalanx just like his father, but the Roman legions exploit the gaps in terrain maneuver around the spears and break the formation with terrifying precision. The Macedonian army crumbles. Perseus flees, is eventually captured, and paraded in chains through Rome in one of the most lavish triumphs the city has ever seen. His fate, a life sentence in comfortable but humiliating captivity. You'd think it ends there, that Rome would just annex Macedonia and be done with it. But no, Rome does something colder. It dismantles the kingdom. Macedon is carved into 4 republics, each forbidden from communicating with the others. A single currency is banned. Trade across borders is blocked. Families are split. No armies, no navy, no monarchy. Not even a name that means anything anymore. It's not just conquest, it's erasure. Back in Greece, fear sets in. City-states rush to demonstrate loyalty. Temples are rededicated, laws rewritten. Pro-Roman statues go up overnight. But under the surface, resentment simmers. And Corinth, wealthy, ambitious, and increasingly nationalistic, begins to push back. You attend a secret meeting. Leaders from across the Achaean League whisper about Roman overreach, corrupt magistrates, unfair taxes. They speak of rebellion, not open war, but corrective action. You leave the room with a chill. Rome's grip has never been tighter. But pressure, as always, creates cracks. And Greece, proud and old as she is, has never stayed quiet for long. The morning in Corinth is unnaturally quiet. No market chatter, no wheels clattering on stone, not even the lazy braying of donkeys. You wander the streets and feel the tension so thick it could stop a spear mid-flight. People move fast and low. Shop fronts are shuttered. Temples are locked. Something is coming. It's 146 BCE and the Achaean League has made its choice. They've gambled. Despite Rome's warnings, despite the fall of Perseus, despite every signal that resistance would lead only to ruin, they rose. It started with a few defiant speeches, a few ignored instructions from Rome, a few overreaches by local magistrates who believed they were defending Greek dignity. Then came the call to arms. You stand near the city walls as they brace for the impossible, a Roman siege. You can see it in the eyes of the defenders: pride, fear, stubbornness. Some still believe they're fighting for liberty. Others just don't want to die with bowed heads. The Roman general this time is Lucius Mummius. He isn't particularly famous, not poetic, not theatrical. He's a bureaucratic, hammer-blunt, steady, efficient. The Senate has given him one instruction: end the rebellion. You watch as his legions surround Corinth. Siege engines rise. Tents stretch like a second city around the walls. Mummius sends envoys first, always with Rome's signature courtesy, a chance to surrender with dignity and be spared annihilation. The Corinthians refuse. Perhaps they remember past promises of freedom. Perhaps they think Rome wouldn't dare destroy a jewel of Greece. Perhaps they simply don't know what else to do. And then it begins. The walls fall quickly. The Roman assault is disciplined, relentless. Resistance is heroic, but scattered. You run through the winding streets as flames begin to take root, first in granaries, then in merchant homes. The legions move in with precision. Temples are looted, statues carted off, gold melted, art confiscated. Mummius, by all accounts, tells his men not to destroy indiscriminately, but war has its own rhythm. Fires spread, buildings collapse. You stand near the Acropolis and watch Corinth burn. The smell is unforgettable: cedar and ash, parchment and blood, the salt of tears and the sickly sweet scent of smoke curling off frescoes painted centuries ago. Historians still argue whether the destruction of Corinth was strategic, symbolic, or just a consequence of losing patience. Mummius himself seems almost ashamed afterward. When shipping Corinth's priceless art back to Rome, he allegedly warns the transport crews, if you break it, you must replace it. Not exactly the line you'd expect from a conqueror. But the damage is done. Corinth is erased, not just defeated, but leveled. Its people are killed, enslaved, scattered. Its treasures displayed in triumph back in Rome. The Achaean League dissolved permanently. You walk through what's left the next morning. A few walls stand like broken teeth. Blackened statues lie in twisted heaps. An old man tries to bury his daughter with a cooking pot. A boy with singed hair scavenges olives from the ruins. This, then, is the final answer to Greece's long question: what happens when you ask Rome to help you fight other Greeks? At first they help, then they stay, then they rule. The quirky, bitter detail. In Rome, the destruction of Corinth and Carthage happened the same year, 146 BCE. Two proud cities burned to the ground. It becomes a symbol. The Republic no longer tolerates limits. Back in Greece, the silence spreads. Athens sighs and keeps its head low. Delos becomes a Roman free trade hub, favored and funded. Sparta weirdly survives, too proud to rebel, too isolated to matter. But the story, of course, doesn't end. Greece becomes a Roman province called Achaia. Roman roads lace across the Peloponnese. Latin becomes the language of law. But Greek philosophy, Greek architecture, Greek theatre, those survive, even thrive. Because while Rome conquered Greece, it also absorbed it. You sit in a Roman villa years later watching children rehearse Euripides in Latin, eating olives grown on land once owned by a Corinthian merchant. The conquerors have become the curators, and now slowly, gently, you begin to breathe more slowly. The fires of Corinth fade into drifting cinders carried gently by the wind across seas, now calm, their fury spent. Roman ships come and go, bearing tribute and scrolls, but in the hills of Arcadia, shepherds still hum the songs their grandparents sang before Rome ever arrived. The legions sleep now, their shields stacked neatly under moonlight, and the marble ruins cast long shadows on ancient roads. Greece is quiet, humbled, but never quite silenced. You rest on a hillside near Delphi, the stars scattered like coins across a purple sky. The oracle's voice is gone, but her stones remain. You run your fingers over inscriptions worn smooth by centuries, and they feel warm beneath your hand like memory itself. Rome may have claimed the cities, but the soul of Greece lingers in her myths, her language, her questions about gods and fate and freedom. Those questions never really go away. And as your breathing softens and your thoughts grow slower, it's okay to let go of the weight of battles and treaties and broken alliances. Let the past slip gently into your dreams, not as tragedy or triumph, but as quiet rhythm, stone fire, sea wind. You've walked with generals and kings, felt the earth shake under marching feet, and watched empires rise and fall like the tides. But here now there is only stillness. A single owl calls from a cypress tree. The waves murmur softly against a forgotten dock, and the ruins sleep beneath vines that do not care who built them.